What happens when love turns into betrayal and secrets lead to bloodshed? A woman's hidden affair with her cousin's husband spirals into a nightmare, ending in a murder that no one saw coming. Was it a crime of passion, or was something more sinister at play? Stay with us as we uncover the shocking truth behind this tragic story, piece by piece. This is a tale of love, deceit, and affair that destroyed two families. It started as a secret romance, hidden behind stolen glances and whispered conversations. But as the affair grew, so did the lies and the danger. The tangled web of betrayal would soon lead to an irreversible tragedy. The key players in this chilling story: a wife who risked everything for forbidden love, a man who betrayed his own wife and shattered his family, a cousin who never imagined the devastation her husband's actions would bring, and finally, a murder that shocked an entire community. But how did it all happen? What led to the ultimate act of violence? And was this a case of cold-blooded murder, or was it an act of desperation? In this video, we'll take you deep into the events that unfolded, from the very beginning of the affair to the shocking moment when it all turned deadly. You'll learn how the relationship started and remained a secret for so long. The moment everything unraveled, exposing the shocking betrayal. The chilling details of the murder that left investigators speechless. The investigation that followed, and the unexpected twists in the case. The final verdict: justice served or injustice repeated. Along the way, we'll also uncover lesser-known details that were buried beneath headlines. You might think you've heard similar stories before, but this one has details that will leave you questioning everything. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story about how choices lead to consequences, how deception can turn deadly, and how, in the end, no secret stays hidden forever. The truth always comes out, and sometimes it does so in the most tragic way possible. So, stay with us till the end as we reveal how a love affair turned into a crime scene, and how one fatal decision changed lives forever. Let's begin. The story begins in an ordinary neighborhood, where life seemed predictable and stable. A loving wife, respected by her community, and a devoted husband who worked tirelessly to provide for their family. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage, something was brewing, something dangerous. It started innocently enough. Family gatherings, celebrations, and holidays brought them all together. Laughter filled the rooms, conversations flowed effortlessly, and no one suspected a thing. Among the guests was her cousin and her cousin's husband, a man who was charming, confident, and effortlessly charismatic. The kind of man who knew how to make a woman feel seen, understood, and desired. At first, it was nothing more than harmless conversation. They shared jokes, exchanged glances, and talked about life struggles. Perhaps it was the way he listened, or the way he paid attention to the small details she thought no one else noticed. He made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. And maybe, just maybe, she did the same for him. No one sets out to destroy their own life. No one wakes up one morning and decides to betray the people who love them the most. But sometimes, temptation whispers, and before you know it, a line is crossed. Late-night messages turned into secret phone calls. Innocent meetings became stolen moments. Every interaction was a risk, every touch a hidden sin. The thrill of secrecy only fueled the fire, making it impossible to stop. They convinced themselves it was harmless, that no one would ever find out. But secrets have a way of unraveling, especially the ones drenched in passion and lies. As time passed, their affair grew deeper, more reckless. They found excuses to be alone, weaving intricate stories to cover their tracks. Family gatherings became dangerous territories where one wrong look, one accidental touch, could expose everything. Yet, the danger only added to the intoxication of it all. Then came the first sign of trouble. A missed call at the wrong time. A message that wasn't deleted fast enough. Suspicion crept in, unnoticed at first, but then it grew, gnawing away at the fragile illusion of control. Her husband, once trusting and unaware, started sensing something was off. Little things didn't add up. A shift in her tone, unexplained absences, a sudden change in behavior. And he wasn't the only one noticing. Her cousin, too, began to feel the weight of something unspoken. A wife knows when something is wrong. She can sense when her husband's heart is wandering, even if she can't prove it. At first, she ignored the nagging feeling. After all, how could it be true? But doubt is a seed that only grows, and once it takes root, it's impossible to ignore. One evening, everything changed. A simple mistake, an oversight that should have never happened. A message left open on a phone screen. Not just any message, but one that made it clear, undeniable, that this wasn't just suspicion. It was real. The betrayal, the lies, the months of deception, it was all there, staring back, unerasable. The confrontation was inevitable. The accusations flew. Emotions ran high, and the reality of what had been happening behind closed doors came crashing down. But what no one knew at that moment was how far this revelation would push someone. How pain and rage, when mixed together, can create something truly dangerous. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about shattered trust, humiliation, and a betrayal that ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. But what happened next, no one saw coming. The silence in the house was suffocating. The air felt heavy, thick with emotions that couldn't be contained any longer. No one spoke at first. There was only the sound of deep, unsteady breaths and the weight of the truth pressing down on them. The betrayal wasn't just discovered. It was exposed, raw and undeniable, right in front of their eyes. And now there was no turning back. Tears burned in her cousin's eyes as she clutched the phone, her fingers shaking as she scrolled through the messages. She read every word, each one cutting deeper than the last. Her husband, the man she had trusted with her life, had been lying to her for months, maybe even longer. And the worst part, the woman he had chosen to betray her with was family. Blood. Someone she had shared childhood memories with. Someone she had trusted without question. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to make it all disappear. But the reality wouldn't change. Her world was already shattered, and there was no way to piece it back together. She turned to him, her eyes filled with fury, hurt, and disbelief. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "How could you do this to me? To us?" He had no answers. He stood there, caught between guilt and panic, knowing that no words could undo what had been done. The woman he had betrayed his wife with, his lover, stood frozen, her face pale. She knew this moment would come eventually, but she had never imagined it would feel like this. Like drowning. Then came the shouting. Accusations flew like knives, cutting through whatever remained of their broken relationships. The wife demanded answers, demanded the truth, but nothing he said could satisfy the anger consuming her. The woman he had betrayed her with tried to speak, tried to apologize, but the words died in her throat. There was nothing she could say that would make it right. Somewhere in the chaos, something changed. Anger turned into something darker, something far more dangerous. The heat of betrayal mixed with uncontrollable rage, and suddenly, the air crackled with tension that was no longer just emotional. It was physical. Hands clenched into fists. Bodies moved closer, fueled by pain and vengeance. And then it happened. No one could say who made the first move. Maybe it was the wife, driven by a fury she had never felt before. Maybe it was the husband, desperate to regain control of a situation slipping through his fingers. Or maybe it was the woman caught in the middle, realizing too late that she was now the enemy. But within seconds, words turned into action, and action turned into violence. A struggle, a scream, furniture crashing to the ground, the sharp gasp of someone realizing too late that they had gone too far. And then, silence. Time seemed to stop. The rage, the shouting, the chaos, it all faded in an instant. The room, once filled with anger, now held something much worse. Fear, dread. The realization of what had just happened settled in, heavy and unshakable. Someone was on the floor, motionless, blood pooling beneath them, staining everything in sight. Eyes wide open, but unseeing. And in that moment, everything changed. The betrayal, the affair, the lies, it no longer mattered. Because now, there was only one thing left, a crime that could never be undone. The room fell frozen in time. The only sound was the heavy breathing of those still standing, their minds racing to process what had just happened. The body on the floor didn't move. The dark crimson spreading across the tile was proof that this wasn't just another heated argument. This was something far worse. She took a step back, her hands trembling, her chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. This wasn't supposed to happen. No one had planned for this. The betrayal, the rage, the confrontation, those were expected. But this was something that could never be erased. His wife stood motionless, staring at what she had done. She had wanted revenge, wanted him to feel the pain he had caused her. But now, as she looked down at his lifeless form, a new fear crept in. This wasn't justice. This was destruction. And there was no undoing it. Then the panic set in. She wasn't alone in this room. There were witnesses, people who knew what had happened, people who could speak, who could tell. Eyes darted between them, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What now? Someone whispered something, but it didn't register. The ringing in her ears was too loud, drowning out every other sound. Her hands were shaking, blood smeared across her fingers, a cruel reminder of how real this was. Then movement. The other woman, the one who had been part of this tangled web of betrayal, finally snapped out of her trance. She took a step forward, but then hesitated. What was she supposed to do? Call for help? Run? Pretend none of this had ever happened? Every option felt impossible. The air was suffocating, thick with the scent of iron and fear. The walls of the house, once a place of love and trust, now felt like a prison. The minutes stretched endlessly, each second heavier than the last. And then, reality hit. There would be an investigation. There would be questions. And there would be consequences. It didn't matter if this was an accident or a crime of passion. There was no escaping what had been done. The first instinct was to run, to wipe away the evidence, to erase the last few moments as if they had never happened. But how do you erase something like this? How do you make people forget a murder? She looked at the woman standing across from her, the one who had shared in the betrayal, the one who had been part of the reason this had happened in the first place. Their eyes met, and for the first time, they weren't enemies. They were two people trapped in the same nightmare. But even in the middle of the chaos, something darker lingered beneath the surface. What if one of them talked? What if the guilt became too much? What if, in a moment of weakness, the truth slipped out? Trust had already been broken once. What was stopping it from happening again? The weight of the moment was unbearable. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, stretching out into a nightmare that neither of them could wake up from. The body on the floor wasn't just a person anymore. It was evidence, a silent witness to everything that had just happened. The wife's breath was shaky, her mind racing with a million different thoughts. Her hands were still stained with blood, and no matter how hard she tried to wipe them against her clothes, the crimson wouldn't fade. The other woman, her cousin, stood across the room, eyes wide, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she struggled to grasp the reality of what had just occurred. They both knew what needed to be done, but neither of them dared to say it out loud. Then, the silence was shattered. A distant sound, a car door slamming outside, footsteps on the pavement. Someone was coming. Panic surged through them like a tidal wave. Their eyes darted toward the door, their bodies stiffening as they realized they had no time. They had to act. Now. The wife turned, her hands gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. "We have to do something," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heartbeat. The other woman swallowed hard, her mouth dry. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice shaking. They had two choices: call the police and confess everything, or cover it up and hope they could live with consequences. Neither option felt safe. The footsteps outside grew louder. Someone was approaching the house. With barely a second to think, the wife rushed toward the body, her hands trembling as she reached down. "Help me," she whispered urgently, her voice hoarse. The other woman hesitated. For a brief moment, she thought about running, leaving, pretending none of this had ever happened. But it was too late for that now. She had already stepped too deep into the nightmare. Together, they moved quickly, their bodies acting before their minds could catch up. The weight of the lifeless figure was heavier than they expected, making every movement slow and difficult. The doorknob rattled. A sharp gasp escaped the wife's lips. Their time had run out. The door creaked open, and the world around them seemed to stop. The door swung open, and for a split second, neither of them breathed. The room, thick with the scent of blood and fear, felt like it had been frozen in time. A shadow stretched across the floor as someone stepped inside. "Hello," a voice called out. It was deep, familiar. Someone they knew. Their hearts pounded in unison. It wasn't the police. Not yet. But that didn't make things any better. The wife turned sharply, her body blocking the gruesome scene behind her. "Why, you scared me," she stammered, forcing a nervous smile. The man standing in the doorway frowned. He was a family friend, someone who had dropped by the house unannounced plenty of times before. But tonight, his timing was deadly. His eyes flicked between the two women, sensing something was off. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. His gaze fell to the floor, stopping just inches from where the blood had started to seep into the cracks of the tiles. "What's going on?" he asked slowly. The cousin forced out a laugh. Too high-pitched, too unnatural. "Oh, nothing. We spilled something. Wine. A lot of it." The wife shot her a glance, barely suppressing the urge to wince at the ridiculous excuse. The man didn't look convinced. He stepped forward, eyes scanning the room like he could feel the weight of something unspoken. His gaze landed on the wife's trembling hands, the smudges of red staining her skin. His eyes darkened. "That's not wine." A heavy silence fell between them. For a moment, no one moved. Then, instinct took over. The wife lunged forward, grabbing his arm in desperation. "Please," she whispered, her voice a broken plea. "You can't tell anyone." The cousin stood frozen, her breath hitching. She could see the moment the realization dawned on him. His expression shifted from confusion to horror, and then to something else entirely: fear. "Who?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who is it?" Neither woman answered, but the silence was an answer in itself. His body tensed. His gaze flickered toward the corner of the room, where the shadows barely concealed what lay beneath. The crimson trail leading to the lifeless body. He took a step back. "Oh my God," he muttered. The wife tightened her grip. "Please," she repeated, more desperate now. No one was supposed to get hurt. His breathing grew uneven, panic creeping into his eyes. He looked toward the door, toward his escape. "I have to call the police." The cousin moved before she even realized what she was doing. In one quick motion, she grabbed the heavy glass vase from the table and swung. A sickening crack echoed through the room. The man staggered, his eyes wide with shock as he reached for his head. Blood seeped between his fingers, his legs giving out beneath him. He collapsed onto the floor with a thud. For a second, no one moved. The cousin stared at the vase still clutched in her hands, her own breath coming out in short, sharp gasps. The wife took a step back, horror spreading across her face. "What did you do?" she whispered. The cousin's fingers trembled as she let the vase slip from her grasp. It shattered against the floor, the sound piercing through the thick silence. "He was going to tell," she murmured, her voice barely audible. I didn't know what else to do." The wife pressed her hands to her mouth, her entire body shaking. One mistake, one night, and now there were two bodies. And this time, there were no more excuses, no more lies. They had crossed a line they could never come back from. The room was drowning in silence, but their thoughts were screaming. Two bodies. Two irreversible mistakes. The wife felt her knees weaken, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to grasp the horror in front of her. The cousin stood frozen, staring at her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. The vase was shattered, its jagged pieces reflecting the dim light like tiny shards of guilt. The wife pressed her fingers to her temples, her mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. The affair was already a mistake. The murder, that was something she could never undo. But now there were two lives lost, and with them, any hope of pretending this had been an accident. The cousin let out a shaky breath, stepping back, as if distancing herself from what she had done would make it less real. "We have to do something," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The wife's eyes snapped to her, a sharp, almost crazed look in them. "Do something," she hissed. "Do what?" "We can't fix this." The cousin shook her head, her hands trembling. "We can't just leave them here. Someone will come looking. We have to think." The wife squeezed her eyes shut. The weight of it all was crushing her, making it hard to breathe. She thought about her husband's lifeless body, about the blood soaking into the floor. Then she looked at the man who had just walked in at the worst possible moment. If they had a chance to escape this nightmare, it was slipping away fast. The cousin stepped forward, her voice urgent. "Listen to me. If we don't act now, we're going to prison. Do you understand that?" The wife opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. She knew the truth. The moment the police arrived, their lives would be over. "We have to clean up," the cousin said, her voice firmer now. "No one knows he was coming here. No one saw what happened." The wife hesitated, glancing down at the second body. "And what about him?" she asked, her voice hollow. A tense silence followed. The cousin swallowed hard. "We get rid of them." The words hit the wife like a slap. Burying a body was one thing. Burying two, that was something different. That wasn't just a crime of passion anymore. That was something planned, calculated. She shook her head. "I can't." The cousin stepped closer, grabbing her by the shoulders. "You have to," she said, her voice fierce. "If we don't, we're done. Do you want to go to prison for the rest of your life? Do you want your kids growing up knowing their mother is a murderer?" The wife's stomach twisted. The thought of her children, of them finding out what she had done, made her physically ill. "We have to move them," the cousin pressed. "And we have to do it now." The wife felt her body go numb as reality crashed over her. There was no way out. Not anymore. There was only survival. Without another word, they moved. Their hands, once hesitant, now worked quickly, fueled by desperation. The weight of the lifeless bodies was overwhelming, but fear gave them strength. They cleaned. They scrubbed. They erased every trace of what had happened. And as the night stretched on, something else settled between them. It wasn't just fear. It was the understanding that from this moment on, they were bound together forever. The night stretched on, but time no longer felt real. Every second blurred into the next as they worked in silence, their breaths shallow, their hands trembling. The scent of bleach burned in their nostrils, mixing with the metallic tang of blood that still clung to the air. No matter how hard they scrubbed, how much they wiped, it felt like the stains would never truly disappear. The wife's fingers ached as she wrung out another blood-soaked cloth, her mind refusing to believe this was real. Just hours ago, her biggest fear had been the truth of her affair coming out. Now, that betrayal felt small compared to what she had become. The cousin worked methodically, her movements stiff but determined. She hadn't spoken since convincing the wife to help her, and in the eerie quiet, the weight of their actions pressed down harder. She dragged the second body across the floor, her breathing uneven. The dull thud as it landed beside the first sent a cold shiver down her spine. They both paused, standing over the lifeless forms. A part of them had hoped that in the rush of adrenaline, in the chaos of covering up their crime, they could push aside what they had done. But now, with the bodies lying in front of them, reality came crashing back. There was no erasing this, no waking up from this nightmare. The cousin wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, smearing a streak of red across her skin. "We need to get them out of here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The wife nodded slowly, but her legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into the floor. "Where?" she finally asked. The cousin swallowed hard. She had thought about it. She had thought about it the moment she swung the vase, the moment the man hit the ground with a sickening crack. She knew they couldn't just leave them here. They couldn't call the police. There was only one option left. "We take them somewhere no one will find them." The wife's stomach turned. The words felt so final, so cold. She had never imagined herself in this position, never thought she would have to make a decision like this. But what other choice did they have? She forced herself to move, her body running on pure instinct now. They wrapped the bodies in sheets, tying them tightly, making sure no part of them was exposed. The cousin grabbed the car keys with shaking hands, and together they dragged the bodies through the back door, their eyes darting to the windows, to the street, to any sign that someone might be watching. The world outside felt impossibly quiet. The wind rustled the trees. A stray dog barked in the distance. The hum of a passing car made them both freeze for a moment, their breath caught in their throats. But no one stopped. No one looked their way. They heaved the bodies into the trunk, slamming it shut with a dull thud that echoed far too loudly in the night. The cousin climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The wife slid into the passenger side, her fingers pressed against her temples, trying to will away the pounding headache forming behind her eyes. Neither of them spoke as the car rolled forward, disappearing into the darkness. But they both knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. What started as a secret, a forbidden affair hidden behind closed doors, spiraled into a nightmare of betrayal, violence, and irreversible consequences. One wrong decision led to another, and before they knew it, they had crossed a line from which there was no return. In the end, no one truly wins in a web of lies and deceit. A moment of passion led to destruction, and the weight of their actions will haunt them forever. This tragic story is a reminder that betrayal, no matter how well hidden, always comes with a price. The choices we make, whether in love, trust, or loyalty, shape our lives in ways we may never fully anticipate. What do you think? Could this have ended differently? Or was tragedy inevitable from the start? Let us know your thoughts in comments. If you found this video gripping, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.